The Shadow Over. Our once peaceful home. I'm Rachel Carter, and until a year ago, the two-story colonial house on Maplewood Drive stood as the picture of suburban tranquility. Our neighborhood in Westfield, Massachusetts, is the kind of place where folks water their lawns on Sunday mornings, and children race their bikes down quiet streets until dusk. It was in that comforting normalcy that I turned 19, surrounded by my mother's laughter and my father's corny jokes. I always felt safe, but life can shift without warning, almost like the air changing before a storm. It happened for us late last fall. My mother, kind, vibrant, endlessly curious, passed away suddenly. One day she was picking apples in the yard. The next, she was gone. The cause was labeled an unexplained illness, a phrase so vague it haunted me. I didn't just lose my mother. I lost the warmth that anchored our lives. Grief sat with me at every meal, in every silent room. Soon, strange sensations began to color my days. The house, once full of light and familiar scents, took on an unsettling stillness. Odd noises flitted in the halls at night, a floorboard creaking, a door closing softly, a low whisper on the staircase. Even our golden retriever, Buddy, seemed more anxious, refusing to enter Mom's sewing room. My father tried to stay strong for us both, but behind his tired eyes, I saw a man unraveling, keeping his sorrow bottled up. It was during these long, lonely evenings that my mind replayed my mother's last weeks. She had grown nervous, jumpy even, as if shadows were trailing her every move. I remember her once gripping my hand at the kitchen sink, voice barely above a whisper, as she glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Promise me, Ray, you'll always listen to your instincts." Back then, I brushed off her unease, ignorant, perhaps, to the shadow creeping into our home. Looking back, I realized those first oddities were only the beginning. Our peaceful home was changing, inch by inch, day by day. What none of us knew was that a far darker presence had already taken root among us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The arrival of Linda. If anyone had told me, as fall turned to winter, that a stranger would soon thread herself into the fragile fabric of our broken family, I would have flat out refused to believe them. Yet, it wasn't long after my mother's funeral that Linda came into our lives. First, like a gentle breeze. Then, soon after, like an uninvited storm. I first met her on a gray December evening. Snow dusted the sidewalk, muffling the world in silence. I came home from the library to find a sleek, red sedan parked in our driveway, a car I didn't recognize. Inside, laughter echoed from the kitchen, eerily out of place. There she was, Linda, with her platinum hair pinned back in a perfect chignon, lips painted a calculated shade of pink. My father, Robert Carter, looked worn but oddly lighter, like he'd exhaled a sorrow he'd been holding since the funeral. Linda introduced herself with a charm that felt just slightly rehearsed. She was quick to mention her years as a nurse, how she'd been through her share of loss, and believed in second chances. Her smile was wide and practiced, never quite reaching her eyes. That night, while she helped my father cook dinner, she carefully avoided looking in my direction. I remember wondering why she always positioned herself between me and Dad, a subtle line drawn in our own kitchen. In the weeks that followed, Linda's presence only grew. She started visiting more frequently, bringing over home-baked muffins, offering advice on how to move forward, and quietly reorganizing things around the house. At first, I tried to convince myself this was what healing looked like, that my father deserved companionship, that I was just being protective. But small things began troubling me. Linda never once mentioned my mother, regardless of how often I brought her up. She would react to old family photographs like they were just clutter rather than precious memories. I caught her rummaging through the hallway closet, frowning over old albums and boxes marked Susan's keepsakes. My father, usually so attuned to my moods, seemed blind to my discomfort. He'd grown quieter, quick to defend Linda's helpfulness, brushing aside my unease as stress or teenage moodiness. He no longer seemed interested in the small traditions we once cherished. Our Sunday pancake breakfasts, our Friday movie nights. Linda didn't care for sweets and wasn't into old films. Gradually, our lives shifted around her preferences. One winter evening, after Linda had left, I found her scarf draped over my mother's favorite armchair, her perfume lingering like an unwelcome guest. The house felt strange, unfamiliar. It was then I decided to start paying closer attention. There was something about Linda that didn't fit, some answering chord of suspicion, resonating deeper than mere jealousy or grief. Her arrival wasn't just a chapter after tragedy. It was the beginning of another story altogether, one that I sensed would demand every ounce of clarity and courage I could muster. The strange signs, the winter that Linda became a fixture in our home, was when the strangeness truly began to seep in. Little things, almost unnoticeable things at first, started to pile up, creating a web of discomfort that I couldn't escape. As I sit here now, months later, with a little more clarity and a lot more heartache, the anxiety and unease of that period feel as sharp as ever. Linda had a way of making herself indispensable to my father. She'd show up before dawn to cook him breakfast and fill the kitchen with her soft laugh, an odd contrast to the silence my mother left behind. She left notes for him on the fridge in precise, looping handwriting, each with a smiley face at the end. When I'd reach for milk, I'd see her reminders. "Don't forget your lunch, Rob," as if marking territory. But her friendliness didn't extend to me. The first time I really noticed, it was a Sunday morning. I found her in the living room, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently in a tone I hadn't heard before. I must have startled her, because she jolted upright when she noticed me. She ended the call quickly, her eyes flicking over me, as if making a calculation. "Just checking on a friend," she said with a smile. But her voice didn't match what I'd overheard. A string of terse sentences about papers and changing things before she notices. I grew more alert after that. Strange phone calls in the middle of the night became routine. I'd hear the faint murmur of Linda's voice from downstairs or outside on the porch, always punctuated by the click of a lighter. She didn't smoke. At least, not when anyone was watching. Once, I followed the orange glow outside and found her speaking harshly into her phone, her face illuminated and twisted into something cold. When she saw me, she slid her phone back into her pocket, her demeanor snapping back into her usual gentle mode. But she gave me a look I'll never forget, like I was an unexpected variable in an otherwise perfect plan. Then, there was the matter of paperwork. One afternoon, I came home early from my campus job and found Linda at my father's old desk, sifting through files. She gave an awkward laugh when she saw me, said something about looking for the insurance renewal forms. My dad, always trusting to a fault, handed over important documents without a second thought. I'd noticed new manila folders appearing in his filing cabinet. But any time I asked, Linda would brush off my questions. Even more suspicious, and much more disturbing, was when I realized that my mother's will had disappeared from the safe in my father's closet. Dad insisted he'd moved it, but he didn't remember where or when. Linda's attitude toward me grew chillier by the week. At dinner, she'd take subtle jabs at my college aspirations, Maybe you shouldn't worry so much about applications, Rachel. There's plenty of time to figure out where you belong. When I tried to talk about my mom, Linda would change the subject. Or worse, sigh, as if my grief were an inconvenience she had to politely endure. She started bringing home little gifts, just for my father, his favorite pastry, a new tie, while ignoring me completely. My role in the family seemed to shrink, while Linda's grew, rooted by her careful manipulation and my father's foggy dependency. The house itself seemed to be siding with her. Lights turned off on their own. The clock in the entryway always ran 10 minutes slow, no matter how many times I fixed it. Baxter, our dog, refused to eat the food Linda prepared and would bark at her bedroom door late at night, hackles up. In my mother's old study, I often felt a chill, a cold, that crept beneath the floorboards and clung to the walls. Sometimes I swore I could smell the faint, sweet trace of my mother's perfume right after Linda had stormed out of the room, as if the house were reminding me what had been lost. It all came to a head one night in February. I woke up to the sound of footsteps, the unmistakable cadence of high heels, which Linda always wore indoors. Peering through a crack in my bedroom door, I saw her moving stealthily toward my father's bedroom, clutching a thick folder. She paused outside my door for a beat, listening, before slipping down the hallway. I held my breath, suddenly gripped by a fear I couldn't explain. That was the moment everything crystallized. This wasn't just grief or anxiety or the paranoia of living with a stranger. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Linda hadn't just come into our lives by accident. She'd come with a purpose. My questions, the bizarre phone calls, the missing papers, and even the way she looked at me as if sizing up an adversary. All of it added up to a conclusion I could no longer ignore. I knew I had to start recording everything, gathering proof however I could. This wasn't only about my father anymore. It was about defending the last part of my mother my family had left. That winter, a new kind of shadow claimed our home. But as I learned to trust my instincts, I also discovered a resilience I never knew I had. And as Linda's manipulations unraveled, my fight for the truth and for my mother's legacy had only just begun. The change in my father, it's almost surreal to look back and remember the man my dad used to be. A mountain of patience and gentle humor, the grounding force in my little world. He's always been the kind of father who'd slide handwritten notes into my lunchbox, who'd sing offbeat songs at family campfires, who somehow managed to fix every broken thing in the house, myself included. After Mom's death for a while, he kept up the pretense for my sake. Morning greetings, awkward attempts at pancakes, little reassurances that we'd see this through. But grief is insidious. It carves away at a person, slowly and thoroughly. And Linda became both a balm and a poison for him, all at once. As winter became spring, I began to notice small shifts in Dad's behavior. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. He'd always been most himself, puttering in our garage workshop, or sorting his beloved vinyl records, while old blues played in the background. Now, those rituals faded away. I'd find him staring out the window for long stretches, eyes hollow, shoulders hunched. Just tired, he'd mumble, dismissing my concern. But there was something brittle in his tone. The sense of safety I'd always felt in his presence grew shakier by the day. Linda's influence was everywhere. Dad's meals became meticulously prepared. The work of her hands, not his. When he smiled, it was a practiced, pinched little thing. The man who once never raised his voice grew irritable, snapping over the smallest inconveniences. A misplaced coffee mug, Oscar tracking in mud. me asking too many questions about paperwork. I stopped, recognizing his laugh. Even his gestures changed. He started biting his nails, something I'd never seen him do, and he'd obsessively check his phone for Linda's texts. The worst moments always happened in the evenings. That used to be our time, the hour when we'd sprawl out on the faded couch, talk about nothing, or sit quietly together, drawing comfort from the silence. Now, after dinner, Linda would shepherd Dad into the study, closing the door with a soft click, leaving me out on the other side. I'd hear the two of them whispering, her voice urgent, his subdued. Sometimes he'd emerge afterward, eyes glazed, muttering about new plans or sorting out family affairs. If I tried to ask what was going on, he'd deflect, growing angry at my persistence. Oscar, always attuned to his people, withdrew as well. The dog would lie outside Dad's door, whining softly or scratching to get in. But Dad rarely noticed. He wouldn't walk Oscar anymore. Those morning strolls became Linda's domain, and Dad seemed content to let them slip away. It was as if every shared piece of our old life was being quietly put aside, traded for something that didn't include me at all. Other people started to see it too. Our neighbor, Mr. Harris, stopped me on the sidewalk one afternoon. "How's your father holding up?" he asked, gaze gentle but searching. I tried to reassure him, but the words stuck in my throat. It got worse when money entered the conversation. I overheard Linda chastising Dad about unnecessary spending and protecting our future. He started insisting on changing bank accounts, shuffling paperwork with shaky hands. Important files disappeared from the family safe, replaced with new folders bearing Linda's neat handwriting. Once, I found Dad poring over insurance documents at the kitchen table, brow furrowed, while Linda looked on approvingly. We fought more frequently. He accused me of being unsupportive, of being stuck in the past, of not giving Linda a fair chance. When I pressed him to talk about Mom, about our memories, and what made us a family, he'd grow defensive and shut down. "This is our life now, Emmy," he snapped one night, voice sharp as broken glass. "Stop trying to live in the past." I knew then that my father, the one who'd held our family together for so long, was vanishing before my eyes. Linda hadn't just claimed space in our home. She'd slipped into my dad's thoughts, replaced his rituals with hers, chipped away at everything that kept us close. I tried desperately to hold on to him, to remind him of the warmth and joy we once shared, but it was like grasping smoke. The lines of communication between us tangled and twisted until I could hardly see the man I loved beneath the surface. It was this loss, slow and merciless, that steeled my resolve to find out the truth about Linda. Because somewhere deep down, I hadn't just lost my mother, I was losing my father too. And I couldn't stand by and watch that happen without a fight. My resolve to uncover the truth, if there was a moment when my heartbreak turned into iron determination, it happened late one night in March. I remember lying awake in my childhood bedroom, staring up at the glowing plastic stars Mom had once stuck to the ceiling. I'd always loved how they made me feel safe. Even as an adult, there was a comfort in their soft shimmer as the rest of the house slipped into darkness. Now, all I could think about was how much the stars reminded me of her warmth and how much felt irretrievably lost. By this point, the household was split into invisible factions. Dad and Linda moving in their synchronized, secretive orbit, me on the outside, desperate for a place to belong, and Oscar, our golden retriever, who seemed as lost as I felt. Every day brought a new small betrayal. A calendar wiped clean of old family traditions. A room repainted in Linda's sterile palette. my mother's favorite cookbook tucked away for safekeeping. I knew something was deeply wrong, but my suspicions were still little more than shadows lurking in the background. The hardest part was the isolation. I tried to talk to my dad about my worries, about my sense that Linda was behind the unsettling changes. He'd wave my concerns off, sometimes with irritation, sometimes worse, pity. "You need to give her a chance, Em," he'd say. Or, "We need to move forward. That's what your mom would have wanted." But none of it rang true. Not to the girl who'd always trusted her gut. The pain of losing my dad, inch by inch, to a stranger's influence, was almost worse than losing my mom. I started journaling everything. Every odd phone call in the middle of the night, every bill that didn't add up, every new restriction placed on me in the house. I kept my notes hidden in a nondescript high school binder beneath my bed, hidden among old poetry assignments and SAT flashcards. I messaged friends I trusted, careful never to divulge too much. Paranoia had wormed its way into my life, making me second-guess even those closest to me. But as I compiled pages, a pattern began to emerge, clear as day for anyone willing to see it. It was the paperwork that finally lit the spark. One rainy afternoon, tucked away at a corner table in the Westfield Public Library, I spread out the stolen fragments, insurance policy updates, signatures that looked nothing like my father's, a change of beneficiary barely dated before my mom's death. I'd taken photos on my phone, snapped quickly whenever Linda left a folder half-cracked open in Dad's study. The evidence felt as heavy as granite in my hands. I remember my hands trembling as I scrolled through digital banking alerts on Dad's phone. He'd left it unlocked for once, while fixing the garbage disposal. A withdrawal for several $1,000s had been made to an account I'd never seen before. Other odd transactions, furniture stores, legal offices, jewelry shops, popped up, each carrying the subtle scent of manipulation. It was as if an invisible hand had reached into the very heart of our family and started rearranging the pieces to suit someone else's plans. But how could I confront them? Linda was clever, always one step ahead. If I pushed too hard, she'd dismiss me as paranoid. Or worse, convince my father I needed psychiatric help. The possibility chilled me to the bone. Besides, there were moments when even I questioned my own sanity. Maybe grief had warped my view, made me see darkness where there was only confusion. That line of thinking didn't last long. One night, as the world outside my window was washed in rain, I heard voices in the kitchen. Linda and my father, speaking in low, urgent tones. I crept down the hall and caught a sliver of their conversation. "Need to handle this soon. She's getting suspicious. If the lawyer asks questions, stick to the story." My father didn't reply, but the resignation in his sigh cut through me, worse than any accusation. From then on, I knew passivity was no longer an option. I needed to assemble real evidence, bring in outside help if I had to. The next day, I made an appointment with Mr. Abrams, our old family lawyer, inventing a college scholarship question as my excuse. I brought him my binder, redacted, just enough to not trigger alarms, and peppered him with questions about inheritance, power of attorney, and revising insurance policies. He saw right through me almost immediately, his eyes growing grave as he asked, "Emmy, is your father acting of his own free will?" The relief of even one adult finally listening to me, that, in itself, was no small victory. Mr. Abrams agreed to quietly look into recent documents, reassure me where he could, and encourage me to keep a clear log of anything unusual. He advised me to install a voice recorder in the living room, a safety measure, he called it, just in case my conversations with Linda ever took a turn. Now, I was playing a dangerous game. Linda, perhaps sensing my shift in demeanor, upped her own manipulations. She alternated between faux sweetness and sharp disapproval, alternating between trying to be your friend and outright threats about tuition or my future. Oscar started sleeping outside my door again, as if sensing the tension. Dad grew more unpredictable, sometimes fiercely protective if Linda was criticized, other times oddly distant, as if detached from his own life. Looking back, I see now how much I grew during those months, not just in caution, but in strength. My mom's voice, long silenced, became louder in my mind. I clung to her old advice. Never ignore your instincts, Emmy. I started digging into old emails, locking up important family documents whenever I could, seeking support in online forums for children of remarried parents and survivors of financial abuse. Each night, I'd replay recent exchanges, asking myself, what am I missing? What dots have I not yet connected? The web around our family tightened. There were anonymous letters shoved into our mailbox. A neighbor claimed she'd seen Linda arguing with a strange man in front of our house. Suddenly, my father wasn't allowed to answer the phone without Linda hovering nearby. The investigation I had started, quiet, desperate, became a full-fledged mission. But, for the first time in months, I didn't feel so powerless. I was scared, absolutely, but not paralyzed. I was my mother's daughter, after all, capable of fighting for the truth, and for what was left of our family's safety and dignity. And I swore to myself, as I clutched that binder full of secrets in my lap, I would get to the bottom of Linda's real intentions, no matter how painful the truth might be. I owed it to my mother, to my father, and most of all, to the version of myself who still believed in the power of doing what's right. My resolve was absolute. This was no longer just a hunch. It was my purpose, unmasking the plot. If someone told me a year ago that I'd find myself tangled in a web of secrets and lies inside my own home, I might have laughed and brushed it off as the premise of a made-for-TV thriller. But by late spring of that year, odds and ends came together, like a jigsaw puzzle with shifting pieces, revealing a picture darker than anything I thought possible. What follows is the part of my story that transformed me from a suspicious, grieving daughter into a relentless pursuer of the truth. I'd spent weeks collecting proof. My room, once a sanctuary of childhood mementos and quiet evenings, had turned into a miniature command post. On the wall, I'd mapped out dates and suspicious events on yellow sticky notes. My desk was buried beneath folders, voice recorder tapes, and printouts of digital banking activity. Each discovery made the discomfort in my chest pulse sharper. Linda wasn't simply a manipulative new presence. She seemed to have actively set out to rewrite our family's future. It was more than emotional dominance. It was financial subterfuge and possibly even a connection to my mother's unexplained passing. But proof is heavy when you're 18. Living under the same roof as the person you fear may be your enemy. Trusting someone else with my evidence became both my greatest hope and my constant terror. My father, shrouded in Linda's influence, was no ally. Friends and neighbors, no matter how sympathetic, were too far from the core of what was happening. So, finally, I went to the only unbiased authority I could imagine, Mr. Abrams, our family's longtime attorney. Making the appointment felt like stepping onto a tightrope strung over an abyss. I told my father I needed guidance about college scholarships. Nothing unusual, just another obligation on the calendar. And when Mr. Abrams greeted me in the sanctum of his wood-paneled office, surrounded by bookcases brimming with thick legal volumes, I felt both small and fiercely determined. I brought it all. the binder full of evidence, voice recordings, and printouts. My hands trembled as I handed them over. Mr. Abrams listened to everything. His patience alone steadied my breath. I played him snippets of Linda's late-night conversations, showed him financial transfers and altered paperwork, and described the heartbreaking changes in my father's demeanor. More than once, I worried that grief had colored my perceptions, but with every fact I laid out, his expression hardened from concern to professional focus. "Emmy," he told me, tapping a finger on one signature that looked suspiciously different from my father's usual hand. "You did the right thing coming here. I promise I'll be discreet. We need to take this very seriously." There was less comfort than I'd hoped in his words, but more resolve, a sense that someone finally saw the stakes. Mr. Abrams worked quietly. He ran background checks, flagged the dubious transactions, and contacted a private investigator he trusted. It wasn't a matter for the police. "Not yet," he said. "Not until we were absolutely certain which laws had been broken." But with a lawyer's thoroughness, he documented everything. He placed an urgent call to my father under the guise of a routine estate update and scheduled a meeting to review the family file. At home, things reached a fever pitch. Linda seemed agitated, as if she could sense her control slipping. She snapped at me more often, over dirty dishes, over Oscar barking, over the faintest mentions of my mother. My father, caught between us, seemed even more fatigued, expressing irritation with the smallest anxieties. I tried to act normal, but the house felt colder with every day that passed. One night, the tension finally snapped. Linda intercepted a letter marked with Mr. Abrams's logo, addressed directly to my father. I spotted her tucking it under her purse as I entered the hallway. She must have read the contents, an invitation for Dad to discuss recent changes in documentation for the estate. That night, her voice rose behind the closed study door. I heard sharp whispers, my name, the word lawyer, and repeated insistence that everything is under control. I knew right then that we'd run out of time. I sent a frantic email to Mr. Abrams from my phone, outlining what had happened and asking him to involve the appropriate authorities. He replied within minutes. He'd already referred the case to the local police for initial consultation and flagged potentially unlawful behavior on Linda's part. He instructed me to keep calm and stay safe. The following day, everything unraveled. 2 police officers arrived at our door, badges visible, polite but firm, as they requested to speak with Linda and my father. Linda tried to smile her way through their presence, but I saw the tension in her jaw. They explained that there were questions about recent changes to the estate, irregularities in the life insurance paperwork, and allegations of undue influence. With the authority of their presence and Mr. Abrams presenting the meticulous case we'd built, Linda had no avenue to escape or talk her way out, not this time. Through the living room window, I saw her steel herself, shoulders squared, lips pursed. She knew the game was up. She was escorted away for a formal interview. My father, pale and shaking, looked from me to the officers and then, finally, at Mr. Abrams, who had quietly arranged to be present for moral support. "Emmy, what have I missed?" Dad asked me in a voice almost too soft to hear, bewildered and frightened. In that moment, every ounce of dread and preparation crystallized into something sharper, a desperate hope that this would finally return my father to me. I tried not to cry, tried to speak evenly as I told him, "We were never safe after she arrived, Dad. But now, maybe we get a chance to start over." It took weeks for the investigation to run its course. Linda's activities were scrutinized. Forged signatures, withdrawals, evidence of coercion, and suspicious connections to my mother's final months. While the official cause of my mom's death remained unexplained, the pressure Linda had exerted, medically, emotionally, and legally, became painfully clear. I testified before officials, watched as the halls of justice took cautious, incremental steps, and gripped my father's trembling hand while lawyers carved out paths forward. My father's recovery was neither swift nor linear. He struggled to accept the depth of Linda's deception. The shame and guilt weighed heavily on him. He apologized for not seeing it sooner, for letting us be vulnerable. But the fog of Linda's control began to lift, and the pieces of the family we'd once been found cautious ways back together. As for me, I learned that courage doesn't always mean acting without fear. It's often the act of pushing ahead despite the threat, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty. When Linda was formally charged and barred from returning to our home, it felt less like a triumphant victory and more like a measured exhale, the kind you take after holding your breath for too long. I share this now, not as a grand triumph, but as a record for myself. And maybe, someday, another girl hunched over her own collection of doubts, hoping for justice. One thing is certain: I will forever carry the lesson that intuition, no matter how battered by grief or fear, is never to be silenced, reclaiming justice and freedom. In the days and weeks after Linda was finally gone from our lives, a strange quiet settled over our house. It wasn't the empty, suffocating silence that followed my mother's passing, or the tense quiet that Linda's presence created with her watchful, controlling ways. This was something new, a delicate hush, fragile and a bit unfamiliar, but full of possibility. It was the first breath after holding it for far too long, the unfamiliar feeling of beginning to unclench and wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be rebuilt. My father and I found ourselves tiptoeing around each other at first, like survivors after a storm, both shell-shocked and uncertain of our footing. He was a man haunted, not just by guilt for what had happened, but by the loss of time, trust, and the pieces of himself that had been almost erased. Therapy sessions started twice a week, and at first, I'd listen from the hallway as he spoke in low, broken tones with Dr. Porter about the reality he had let slip away. He apologized to me more than once, his voice thick with grief and remorse. I should have protected you, Em. I should have seen it. Forgiveness wasn't something I handed over on a whim. It was a gradual process, measured in the slow return of our old routines. The Sunday pancake breakfasts that used to fill the house with the smell of syrup and laughter. Small talk as we walked Oscar in the mornings, and new traditions quietly taking root in the gaps left behind. My father returned albums to the old stereo, filled every room with the sound of music my mother loved, and let the dog curl up at his feet again. I could see the color returning to his world, as if the gray film Linda had spread over our lives was finally lifting. But shedding the past was more complicated than simply erasing Linda's name from our mailbox. There were police interviews, legal meetings, and endless paperwork to handle. The practical aftermath that too often gets overlooked in the telling of stories like mine. Linda's crimes, financial manipulation, fraud, and coercion became the subject of a slow-moving investigation. I testified, sometimes trembling, sometimes furious, as I described how she had rewritten our family's story for her own gain. Listening to the lawyers recount the forged signatures, the altered insurance documents, and the timeline of suspicious withdrawals, I oscillated between righteous indignation and a bewildering sense of vulnerability. It was brutal to watch my dad sit through those meetings, his face an open wound, every time the details of Linda's betrayal surfaced. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying the entire ordeal in my mind. Linda's arrival, the creeping unease, my father's slow transformation, and my own stubborn refusal to accept what was happening. Sometimes I worried that I had let anger carry me too far, that my instincts had made me paranoid or unfair. But then I'd remember the weight of that evidence in my hands, the look in Linda's eyes when she realized she'd been caught, and the first real smile from my father after months of darkness. I realized that reclaiming justice wasn't just about punishing Linda. It was about restoring truth, safety, and agency, about showing that we could not be manipulated into silence. Slowly, the community around us reached out. Neighbors who had grown distant during Linda's reign began stopping by again, dropping off casseroles or offering gentle words in the grocery store. My best friend, Natalie, came over with a stack of bad horror movies, and together we laughed harder than we had in months, letting go of a bit of fear each time. "You fought hard for him," she said one night, squeezing my shoulder. "You never gave up." That meant more than I could say, because fighting for my father, for my mother's memory, and for our future had nearly broken me. But it also rebuilt me in ways I never expected. I became more vigilant and sharper. Yes, but also more vulnerable and aware of how easily trust can be purchased or betrayed. I learned to speak up, to gather allies, to document everything, and to believe in the value of my intuition even when others doubted it. The day the court officially barred Linda from any contact with our family, my father and I sat on the front steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Oscar lay between us, his head resting on my father's knees. And for a moment, it felt almost normal. "I'm so proud of you, Em," my dad said quietly, tears glimmering in his eyes. "You saved me, and yourself." I didn't know what to say at first. No one is prepared for heroism in their own home. I had spent so long just surviving, guarding my heart, my memories, my family, that the idea of freedom seemed almost out of reach. But as the world around us slowly righted itself, and I realized there would be no more unexpected footsteps in the hallway, no more fear of what secrets could be unearthed, I began to see what freedom might look like, not forgetting the past or pretending we hadn't been hurt, but choosing to move forward anyway. I started going back to class with a new purpose, determined to finish my degree and maybe even become a counselor myself, someone who could stand beside others fighting similar battles. My father returned to gardening, planting sunflowers in the backyard to honor my mother's favorite blooms. Oscar slowly stopped barking at shadows and started chasing squirrels again. I know we're not the same as before, and I know the scars will never truly leave us. But in their place are new bonds, ones forged by fire rather than comfort. The world can be dangerous, even in the most peaceful suburbs, but it is also full of people willing to listen, to protect, and to fight for justice. My mother once told me, "Your instincts are the lantern when it gets dark. Never put them out." I carry that lantern with me now, lighting my way through whatever darkness may come, always remembering that freedom is the ability to trust yourself and claim your own story, no matter how many times others may try to rewrite it. This, I realize, is what true justice looks like. Not just the righting of legal wrongs, but the restoration of our agency and the stubborn, beautiful hope that what was lost can, in some way, be found again.